What is Sanae Takaichi's existential crisis theory? The news that a sitting Japanese prime minister openly declared in the Diet. If a conflict breaks out in the Taiwan Strait, Japan will dispatch troops. Likely stunned many when it first broke. Even the United States hasn't dared to make such an absolute statement. So why has Japan suddenly become so tough? What's even stranger is that the US, their master, didn't applaud this seemingly hardline stance against China. But Japan's economic community panicked first, and even her own cabinet is quietly trying to de-escalate. This is fundamentally not a sign of Japanese toughness. It's more like an absurd drama of setting oneself on fire. The truth is, Sanae Takaichi dares to say this because of a loophole in Japan's 2015 new security legislation. The concept of a survival-threatening situation. The term sounds abstract, but simply put, it is Japan's self-issued deployment permit. They don't have to wait to be attacked, as long as they feel, if our friend is attacked, we are done for. They can mobilize the self-defense forces. It's like barging into your neighbor's argument, claiming, "If you keep arguing, my house's windows will shatter," and then beating them up, all based on a self-made excuse. What is even more mind-bending is that the Prime Minister, who claims to be protecting Japan, is holding Japan's death certificate in her hands. She herself admitted in the Diet that 90% of Japan's energy and 25% of its foreign trade rely entirely on the Taiwan Strait shipping lanes. If a conflict occurs, oil supplies would be cut off within a month, and all auto and chip factories would have to stop. To be blunt, she is not protecting Japan. She is actively handing Japan's Achilles heel to others, then using this vulnerability as a bargaining chip to secure political capital for herself. Next, let's get to the bottom of this. What is the trick behind Sanae Takaichi's deployment dream? Why is the US not accepting the token of allegiance she offers? The European experience is an ominous foreshadowing of Japan's likely outcome. Takaichi's existential crisis theory, a political gambit. Sanae Takaichi's existential crisis theory is essentially a political gamble to shift internal anxieties onto an external conflict, a strategy that appears utterly flawed when compared to Europe's energy crisis of the past. When the Nord Stream pipeline was sabotaged in 2022, 55% of Germany's natural gas supply was cut, causing pillar industries like chemicals and steel to nearly halt, a dependence more severe than Japan's reliance on the Taiwan Strait shipping lanes. However, Germany did not cry out, "We'll attack whoever bombed the pipeline." Instead, they built 6 LNG receiving terminals within 6 months and doubled their import of US LNG within a year. Even with a 0.3% GDP contraction in 2024, they did not use the existential crisis as an excuse for military adventurism. In contrast, an internal 2024 report by Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry clearly stated, oil reserves will be critical within 30 days of a Taiwan Strait conflict. Yet, Takaichi never addressed how to solve energy security, choosing instead to point the finger at the Taiwan Strait. Her true target is the domestic conservative faction and military-industrial complex. By shouting, "Protect the Taiwan Strait," she can legitimately increase military spending and revise the constitution, allowing military giants like Mitsubishi and Kawasaki to profit handsomely, while she simultaneously cultivates an image as a tough leader. This act of using national security as a campaign prop is a class below Germany's pragmatic transformation in the face of the energy crisis. Analysis: packaging Japan's economic fragility as a justification for military intervention is Takaichi's most insidious move. Germany used action to address its shortcomings. Japan uses slogans to divert conflict. These two choices reflect different levels of national responsibility. Takaichi knows well that ordinary citizens don't understand the security legislation, but the panic of energy running out can incite emotion. Conservatives don't care about national interests, but the promise of constitutional revision and military expansion can win votes. This seemingly shrewd gamble actually pushes Japan toward a dilemma. Either crippled by the economy or dragged down by war. Its essence is the politician's self-interest triumphing over national interest. The US alliance, a lesson Europe has already learned. Sanae Takaichi's biggest confidence booster for taking such an aggressive stance is the Japan-US alliance. However, she forgets that the US has always treated its allies as pawns, a lesson Europe has already paid for. In 2022, the US introduced the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, using massive subsidies to lure production capacity from German companies like BMW and Mercedes to the US. It then slapped a 25% tariff on European steel, costing Germany over €180 billion in a single year. Now, Takaichi is desperately volunteering to be the US vanguard in the first island chain, offering the token of allegiance. Japan will deploy troops if something happens in the Taiwan Strait. But what was the US reaction? The Trump administration merely said it hopes for regional stability, without even offering verbal support. What is more heartbreaking is that the US focus is currently not in the Asia-Pacific. It is busy harvesting profits from Europe, Japan, and South Korea. EU statistical data shows that in 2023, the US price for LNG exports to Europe was twice that of Russian pipeline gas, netting the US €120 billion from Europe in 1 year. The US has not been soft on Japan either. Toyota and Honda factories in the US have faced tariffs, and semiconductor equipment exports have been restricted. Takaichi believes that by helping the US monitor China, she can gain benefits like constitutional revision and nuclear sharing. Yet, the European example is clear. If the US can be ruthless with its closest allies, how could it possibly give Japan genuine benefits? It merely wants Japan as a shield while it reaps the rewards. Analysis: Sanae Takaichi's token of allegiance is worthless in the eyes of the US. America needs an obedient Japan, not a troublemaking Japan. If Japan truly stirs up the Taiwan Strait and disrupts the US's path to making money from Asia, Japan will be the first to be dealt with. The European lesson is profound enough. Reliance on US security protection will only lead to economic value being drained. Following the US in confrontation will ultimately lead to becoming a mere chess piece. Takaichi fails to see this, charging forward with the fantasy that America will protect me. Such a politician, who understands neither the US nor geopolitics, will only lead Japan into an abyss, the revival of an old imperialist lie. The term, existential crisis, is already the inherited lie of Japanese militarism, a playbook the US is tired of using and Europe has suffered greatly from. In 1964, the US fabricated the Gulf of Tonkin incident, claiming Vietnam attacked US warships, using it as an excuse to expand the Vietnam War. Its essence is identical to Takaichi's Taiwan Strait existentialism. Both use a false crisis to mask ambitions of aggression. During World War II, Japan cried out for survival space to invade China. Now Takaichi shouts for energy security to interfere in the Taiwan Strait. The rhetoric hasn't changed. More ironically, Europe is now reflecting on the cost of following the US, with Macron and Scholz constantly advocating for European strategic autonomy. Yet Japan is still strapping itself onto the US war machine. Data from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute shows that from 2020 to 2024, US arms exports to Europe surged by 233%, transforming Europe into an arms market, from which the US profited handsomely. Takaichi's current aggressive military buildup is essentially working for the US military-industrial complex. Every F-35 and every Aegis destroyer Japan buys is a profit for the US. Europe is beginning to awaken, aiming to build its own defense system and shed US dependence. Japan, however, is doing the opposite, using the existential crisis as a pretext to turn the nation into a US arms depot and forward position. This approach, counter to the tide of history, is doomed to fail. Analysis: from survival space to existential crisis. Japan's rhetoric of aggression has never been updated, exposing an unchanged ambition of militarism. The US profits from war using false crises, and Europe has already paid the price of economic contraction and soaring energy costs. now striving to break free. Sanae Takaichi, however, is actively stepping into this trap, fabricating lies to incite the public while helping the US harvest Japanese wealth. History has long proven that nations that shift internal conflicts through external provocations will ultimately bring disaster upon themselves. Nations that hand over their destiny to others never have a good ending. If Japan does not correct its course in time, it will inevitably pay for Takaichi's ambition, a dangerous underestimation of China. Sanae Takaichi's arrogance also stems from a wishful thinking that China will be afraid of hurting the mouse by breaking the vase, meaning reluctant to act forcefully for fear of collateral damage, and will not retaliate strongly. But she forgets that the Taiwan issue is China's core interest, and touching it will incur a price. The statement by the Chinese consul general in Osaka, "Any dirty head that pokes an uninvited must be unhesitatingly chopped off," racked up 120,000 reposts in 24 hours and became a top trending topic in Japan. This is no longer a warning, it is an ultimatum. In contrast, Europe, facing US tariff suppression, dared to retaliate with punitive tariffs, while Japan, facing China, its largest trading partner, actually dares to provoke, essentially cutting off its own arms. China is not Russia, much less Iraq. In 2024, China's GDP is over 4 times that of Japan, its steel output is 10 times, and its military budget, though only 1.7% of GDP, is over 3 times Japan's actual scale. More importantly, China controls the world's most complete industrial chain. Japan's auto and semiconductor industries cannot function without Chinese raw materials and markets. Takaichi shouts, "We'll deploy troops if something happens in the Taiwan Strait." But she hasn't done the math. Once Sino-Japanese relations break down, Japanese auto factories will shut down due to a lack of Chinese parts. Semiconductor companies will collapse from losing the Chinese market, and with 90% of the energy channels severed, the national economy and livelihood will be paralyzed within a month. This is Japan's true existential crisis. Analysis: Sanae Takaichi's arrogance is fundamentally due to ignorance of China's strength and a misjudgment of historical trends. She assumes China will show restraint as it does in minor skirmishes, forgetting that the Taiwan issue is the red line of all red lines. She believes Japan is safe with US backing, forgetting that China is Japan's biggest economic support. Europe dares to challenge the US because it knows it has leverage, whereas Japan's leverage is entirely held by China. Inciting a Taiwan Strait crisis is not a path to survival. For Japan, it is a path to ruin. China's warning is explicit. One step further, and the consequence will be more severe than merely chopping off a head. Japan needs to wake up. Sanae Takaichi's existential crisis theory is, in the end, a self-directed political farce, using a false crisis to incite emotions, using the American banner to embolden herself, and using the interests of Taiwan as a bargaining chip, all to pave the way for her political ambitions. Yet this farce has neither fooled the US nor intimidated China, instead exposing Japan's fragility and short-sightedness. Taiwan is a part of China. This is an ironclad fact, not a tool for Japanese politicians to garner votes. Peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait are a common interest of Asia-Pacific nations, not an excuse for Japan to pursue militarism. Takaichi can continue to shout, but she cannot change anything. The initiative on the Taiwan issue will always be in China's hands, and if Japan dares to interfere, it must pay the price.